All right, let's talk a little bit about Resistenza. A game about a particular region's of Italy's resistance movement. So, I guess we'll start with components because I'm having trouble figuring out where to start. All right, nice wooden pieces, work fine. The cubes, the only thing I have with this is the little, the larger black cubes aren't explained in the rules, but you can figure out why, you need a differentiation in size. The counters, okay, so these and the standees, which I have in here, and you get two different sizes of standees, which is kind of a weird sort of variety to have. The larger ones feel a little large, but there's also a potential advantage to being able to use them in airdrops to be able to influence your die rolls a little bit better. It didn't help me at all, but it might help some people. They provide for, I don't know, a certain level of leave that alone. The actual images on them I've mentioned already in play. I think they're very, very evocative of the period and very appealing in a lot of ways. And there's just this really, I just really love the artwork on those. You got this thing which is barely used in the game. It's used for one thing, which is for airdrops, and it's sort of a dexterity thing where you're trying to control what the die rolls as well as where you have to control where it lands on its first hit and where it ends up. And that's a kind of funky mechanism that I don't know. I'm not too good with it, but it's okay. You've got all the components are duplicated Italian and English, which is definitely a better way to do things than to try to create entirely symbolic representations and handle everything in the rules, etc. The big place where that's important, there's a fair amount of cards in the game. The character cards are all, actually there's 4 times the character card. There's 4 copies of character cards because you need a set for the simpler game, I guess. I don't know. There'd be confusion with the larger game. There's a fair-sized deck of decent poker quality cards. I talked about them. They're a little bit... they're not in that... There's sort of a fantastic level of cards that comes out these days. These are up there with Magic cards and whatnot, though. So, nothing to complain about there whatsoever. Well, not with the, not the alphas, but more recent Magic cards. Again, there's multiple sets of rules in the game. So you've got a rule book, a simplified rule, and then a historical. They're the same size. Okay, and then a historical and designer notes booklet. So again, all duplicated. Nobody's sparing, saying, hey, well, if you want the online you can get the online version of the designer's notes or whatever. No, you got something kind of nice to read. And I find designer's notes particularly interesting. They also give an explanation in the designer's notes. They give historical information on all of the cards that have any historical aspects, as well as to all the characters. Now, what's kind of interesting about all of the characters, when I looked at it, I said, wow, that's really weird. I'm shocked that there's like 3 brigades that are best represented by women. That's really a wave to modern sensibilities. The truth of the matter is the 3 males all commanded actual combat and insurgency forces of some sort or another. The three women are all kind of support people, although the one who's feisty actually liked to shoot a gun, but I mean, really liked to. But yeah, I mean, we're not talking about a situation where there was anywhere near that kind of parity. And there are some other liberties taken with this. There's no question about that. In fact, I want to touch on that a little bit. In the design notes, there's a couple of points that are brought up here that, for example, the convoys are kind of too important an aspect of the game for what they historically represented, that wouldn't be sort of the major thing that the brigades are doing. But I gotta say, a lot of the other stuff that they're doing wouldn't make for a great game. And it's abstracted away in those, hey, gathering materials for cubes and whatnot. So while in the game you may be spending more time concentrating on trying to hit a convoy or whatever, the truth of the matter is the things that you're doing that aren't that are kind of represented by the other actions that you're taking. They're just not in as much detail, but it's a fairly abstract game across the board. Oh, I didn't talk about the board. If I'm talking about components, I gotta talk about the board. Well, we'll wait a moment. So what they talk about here is many of the successful partisan actions were actually attacks against fixed positions. There's a few of them in the game, but for the most part, there's kind of this, hey, look, stuff shows up here, so you don't really get the chance to prepare for that. You just have to always be ready in the game to be able to take an action if it shows up. And maybe as you learn the decks more and more, you'll understand where you want to be at given times. I didn't find that necessary, though. I was able to succeed in the game the second time playing. First time I didn't play with the correct rules. I hurt myself badly there, but also my strategy was less refined. I didn't understand what I needed to do to succeed. There is a simplified version of the game, but I felt like if I played that, I would not understand. It wouldn't lead me to understand what I had to do to win the big game. It might teach me some of the mechanisms, which I found were difficult to internalize, but it gives you a reduced set of them. Then they go into other things that they're like, well, some of it may be streamlined and abstracted to some extent, but the mechanics tie in more closely with the actual processes involved. What the final paragraph in this, I do find a little weird. All in all, given the necessary simplification and distortions, it's fair to say that it puts more emphasis on evoking the partisan struggle rather than simulating it. I mean, I get what they're saying, that it's not, a detailed simulation of what's going on, but to some extent, I don't really disagree too much with the simulation side. What I find in terms of the evoking, I would actually say it's more representational than evocative, which is to say, the actions that I'm taking in the game, I'm very much trying to optimize my chances of winning a game. It really feels that way. Very little of it feels like, oh, I know that this route is being used for this, and maybe that'll come later with more plays, but it really does feel more like I'm trying to optimize my position to be able to take advantage of certain cards coming up, rather than this real, oh yeah, I'm trying to gather supplies here, or I'm trying, to recruit, and I need to balance those two. You kind of do, but it's just not where the mental focus is, at least for me. Which is to say, yes, these pieces give you that very strong evocative experience of what artwork, of artwork that fits in very nicely with it. But the actual play of the game, it's never a case where I feel like I'm kind of in this role-playing type experience or anything at all like that. Which I do feel in some, in games that give more detail in the simulation, but I also feel it in games. I'm thinking here something like Ambush, where you really are being put in the mindset of not knowing what's out there and having things kind of thrown at you, etc. So that's all built in a sort of way that it really does feel like you have that sort of tension in there. And in opposed games as well, quite often I feel like I have that sort of tension in there. Deals that I'm cutting in big multiplayer games like Pax Britannica, I feel like, yeah, I am in the mindset of the people who are cutting these kind of deals. At least the attempt is, the game is flavored in a way that directs me that way, even if it's not necessarily the best way to win the game. All right, so I wanted to hit the board. Now, you see this white. This is the one thing that led me to, along with some creases in the map, that led me to believe maybe this isn't the final copy, but I think it is. And there's nothing terribly wrong with it. It's just the production quality on the map is not the highest. But it's also well above what you would expect, say, from a more, I don't know, say from the 70s with the Avalon Hill maps with their crease down the middle, or their maps that if you kind of backfolded them a little bit would break into as many pieces as they have panels or more. So, take that however you want. It's certainly functional. I found it a little difficult, mainly because of the number of regions that are unfamiliar to me. We're not talking about something like, oh, it's Tuscany or Lombardy. We're talking about stuff that, as I've said several times throughout the playthrough, that's more analogous with like counties in U.S. states. How many people know all the counties and where they are within their state? I know I've been terrible about that, and I'm not a bad person at geography. So it's hard to find things on there, and I suggested that maybe a number letter combination to help you find things with either a Gazette or that number letter combination written wherever the location is referenced in a card or whatever. It would just be an extra couple characters on each card. I think most of the cards could handle that, so you wouldn't have to go with a separate Gazette, which would be an obnoxious thing to do. Let's take a look at the different mechanisms in the game. So one of the things is with the rules, well, I didn't discuss the rules too much from a component sort of point of view, which is that the rules are kind of, I'm out of battery. The rules are somewhat hard to approach for me. And that's a combination of a couple of things. I think the biggest one is this is an innovative, different system. And that's always harder to approach. And I think, as I get older and my brain ossifies more and more, it becomes more and more of a problem to catch up. It's not a complex game, but it doesn't use like the numerical indexing throughout it, where each paragraph, well, here I've got numbers next to everything, but where each paragraph basically has or a couple of sentences in the case of SPI and Avalon Hill basically has its own unique identifier, which makes it very, very easy, if the references are all maintained properly, to find what's being referenced within the rules. Oh. So this is kind of useful. There's a player aid back here that tells you where to find everything and gives you a short wording of stuff, and I wish I had noticed this. That looks really, really useful. It might be worth making a photocopy or two of that, because it's on the back of the rule book, where if you're like me, you've got the rule book open all the time instead of this. Because they're throwing in so much paper in the game that copying this would be an extra burden. All right, let's take a look at the different mechanisms, though. Some of the rules I did find were either ambiguous or poorly written or translated in such a way that the only way to kind of make sense out of them was to read the example. I hate reading examples, but here, well, they were necessary for whatever reason. And it's not like you're reading through the rules and you're like, well, I don't understand that. It's when I'm playing, I'm looking at the card, how it's explained. I try to remember how the rules went, and I am able to find an example that clarifies things. And I feel like I have the understanding in a discussion about one of those that I don't know if I've got the gist of it right. But it's an optional rule, so it's not that big a deal. So looking at the different facets of the game, the setup itself, you take the card set, and everything's kind of timed for either a year, or in the case of 1944, it's split into all 4 seasons of that year. You basically have a set of cards for 43, 45, and for the first half and second half of 44, which gives you, within that, you get a selection of certain cards which are in play or not. And you shuffle them up and stack them on top of the deck so that, the 45 cards are at the bottom, etc., going up. So that you go through everything in kind of a chronological order, but it's not a fixed chronological order. In addition, some of the cards are removed from the deck in this process, making each game going to be a little bit unpredictable. So you can't be sure that you're going to get certain events. Since the balancing mechanisms involve removing or adding cards of various types to the deck, that kind of means that you might be tinkering with a little bit of that replayability in terms of making the game either much more varied or much more scripted. That's a cost to the mechanism that's used for balancing the game out, which is kind of a shame. You could do other things, though. I can think of other ways to make the game just a little bit harder that aren't included in the rules. Like, hey, if you're attacking a convoy or a set of tokens or whatever, add 1 to its strength. That wouldn't tinker with the basis of it, or maybe half the time add 1 to the strength or something like that. Because I did find in my second playing, I did surprisingly well from what I thought I would be doing, especially since I thought I was doing really poorly early on. But the first time I played, I had no clue what I was doing, and I was cheating against myself. So I had a balance going in the other direction that was much, much worse. And we're talking about a big difference in both cases. It was not a close game in either case. So once you shuffle the decks in that way, you get a number of... the way it's set up is that each period in the game has so many cards that are good for the resistance, so many cards that are kind of bad for the resistance, and then all the convoys. And that means that you have a certain amount of point generation that comes off the convoys, and the good and bad cards give you chances that your brigades get hit or whatever. And then there are some that are kind of mixed, like they do something bad to you, but they also give you a paradrop or something like that, which gives you a potential partial remediation of the bad effect. So you get a mix of cards that's kind of determined by the level of difficulty that you're playing, but playing at the base level of difficulty, it's fairly even good and bad cards. Now, the combat cards themselves serve a number of purposes. First of all, they're a pure randomizer sometimes when the fascists attack you. But they also give you a set of different things that you can do with any given card. So kind of like in the CDGs where you have, you could use this for this, you could use this for that, you could use the points for a multitude of different options, or the event or whatever. In these cases, there's no event, but there's a number of different things on each card that you're able to use that card for. And so since those are kind of your resources for your brigade, you have this decision making. Hey, what am I trying to do on my next turn? What do I want to keep? What do I want to expend? You know, how much is the points important versus the movement capabilities and stuff like that. So that's all very very nice how much flexibility you have with the cards, and it gives you that same kind of power that you have in the CDGs or whatever, in terms of making your decisions as to what to do with given cards. So that's, yeah, the setup is kind of this randomization of the deck is really the big deal there. The game itself, when you're playing it, you draw an event card for your brigade. You resolve several effects off the event, some of which may be good, some of which may be bad, and some of which may be point opportunities that are sort of in between. If you don't take the points, they end up going into the enemy bag. So every time that you're offered points, you have kind of this decision to make. Do I want those points? Are they worth the cost to chase down? But they're twice as valuable as they seem. Because if you succeed, you get the points in your little red bag, and if they fail, they go into the little black bag, which is the bad bag. And by the way, speaking of which, these bags are really nice little things. They feel wonderful. I did find that the space on the board, where you kind of keep a pool of counters, while that might have advantages to not noticing that a counter, to make sure that the counters are all face down, I don't like mixing those up, and it's a pain in the butt to mix things flat in a little box like that. So I used a baggie for that. That had its own disadvantages. I don't know. Maybe a box top would be the best way to handle those, where you can kind of shake it up, but they'll flip over. There's nothing really good to handle this kind of thing, the selection of counters. There is a little bit of dimpling on the counter, so you can kind of tell which way it's going when you draw out of a bag, but it's not as extreme as in some games. Okay. So, different mechanisms in the game. There's a search mechanism which gets triggered by the event cards. What search does, and I gotta keep checking this because it might be dying. What search does is it rewards you, like you're harder to find if you're further from the roads, where the good stuff, where a lot of your attack capabilities is going to hit. But on the other hand, there are good reasons. Again, you want to be near the roads so that you can strike things. So you have that kind of question in there. Also, the size of your brigade affects your chances of being more of a threat, which affects your chances of being searched. So the more you do, the more threat you kind of accumulate. That's one of the mechanisms of the game. When you're being searched for, the bigger you are, you might accumulate more threat just for that, and make it easier to find you. If you are found, whether or not an attack is successful against you, there will be an attack, but it may not happen. Like, there will be an opportunity for an attack to be generated. If you're found, then your opportunities, you're exposed, your opportunities to do things with your brigade are more limited. Which gets us to the thing that I think should be in a different place in the rules. When the fascists attack you, again, this has a factor as to where you are. Well, actually, where you are doesn't matter for searching. Searching is not affected by where you are. But when you're being attacked, the more effort that the fascists have to get to you, the further you are from a road, the more of the cards that they're handed, and they'll be given combat cards, are going to be required to get to you, to attack you. And then their strength is based on the remaining cards. Now, the number of cards they get is based on what your threat factor is, which determines how hard they're looking for you, but also how hard they're going to come after you. You have to use your own combat cards and other abilities to kind of counter that, and if you don't, you might get eradicated or you might lose some partisans. On the nice side, if you lose partisans, you end up losing threat value. There we go. I lost something. So when I was playing, I think the first time I was doing this, but I missed this the second time, which is if you are attacked by any means and the attack doesn't succeed, your brigade gains a threat. So that may have had something to do with how it certainly helped me. Oh, okay. Some events and convoys allow, and then at the end of the game, allow for the partisans to make attacks. They're not allowed to just do this on their own. They have to be given an opportunity to do so by other mechanisms inside the game. And the way they do that is they have to move, and basically the location that they're going from, they have to play movement arrows off their combat cards, which eats up some of their other capabilities, in order to get to the location. Now, quite often the location is a road or is on a road, which means that the further you are from the road and the more you're trying to avoid being attacked, the more you have to pay to be able to attack something that's worth points. It's not always the case, though. Sometimes points just show up in valuable regions. And your goal there, you're going to play combat cards. After you reach the location you're going to attack, you play combat cards face down before you know what the enemy is. Then your combat cards don't have to be face down. The enemy is face down, in general, unless they've been scouted. Then you flip the enemy over and see what happens. And you have some opportunities, either through tokens that you have that give you bonuses, or through committing partisan power, and that's done by rolling a die, and if you get under the amount of partisans you commit, you add the strength of the die roll to be able to overcome that force. And whenever you commit partisan counters to the battle, there's a fairly good chance that you will lose some counters, which is done by a difference between the die roll and the number of partisans you committed, which is an interesting factor. It reminds me of, I can't remember the guy, Ben Madison, I think his name is. Hi, turkeys. Has some games where you pick the number of dice you want to roll, and if you go over the total, you end up taking damage. This is similar in that concept. You pick how many partisans you want to commit. If you roll exactly that amount, you're good. If you roll over or under that, the difference is how many casualties you take, up to the amount you committed. Well, I feel like this mechanism works a lot better than the Madison one, which allows for some really stupid results, where like an all-out attack means that like you do no damage but you're wiped out or something like that. Yeah, that can happen sometimes, but just the balance comes out wrong in that system. In this system, I feel very comfortable with what it does. The airdrops, again, I told you about this. You drop a die from a certain height, that's part of the game balance factors, and it has to land on the place where the airdrop was committed to, which might be which might not be anything that you really want particularly. And then where it lands, if that's a brigade, if there's a brigade there, not where it hits first. Where it hits first has to be the first, the place where it's being dropped. But where it lands ends up in a brigade place. It ends up generating a number of bonuses that's determined by the die roll in terms of combat card supplies. I found that really, really hard to do. There's some variance. Like I said, there's balancing. The balancing is supposedly more about how hard your table is. Well, you can't really tell how hard that is until you start trying it on that. So it's like every new surface that you play this game on, you're going to have to kind of guesstimate what the balancing factor should be. Convoys themselves, let's check again. Yeah, we're dying here. Uh-oh. Convoys themselves travel along the roads on the board, and the closer you are to a particular segment of the road that the convoy's on, the less movement factors you have to spend, thereby depleting your combat capabilities on your cards and other capabilities as well, so that you end up wanting to be near the road in order to intercept the convoys, especially, which are kind of fixed. They're all going to happen in the game, versus avoiding attacks by being too far away that the fascists have to expend a lot of effort to get to you. We handled the neo-fascist attacks. Eradication when you're knocked out of the game. Well, when your brigade is knocked out due to all the partisans being destroyed and taking another hit in an attack, you can bring them back. It's an expensive process. It takes one of your turns completely to do this, except right at the beginning of the game when the partisans or brigades are first placed on the board. Some of them get to come in and do other things. They get to come in off an event card, which is a powerful bonus. I'm going to need to swap batteries to talk about some of the other stuff. Before I do this, I wanted to show you somebody's ass. Hi! Oh, let's see what happens. Not too disturbed. Okay. They scrape their wings along the ground, and it makes this nasty noise along the concrete. Okay, so what else is there in this? Well, each brigade in turn draws an event card. The event card's completely processed. Then they take a set of actions, which is largely, it's as many as they like in the full game, but there's a cost to each action, and there's limitations that prevent you from being able to just do it forever. Like create a little machine that just lets you go on forever. And then finally, you reduce threat against your brigade, perhaps. Okay, so the different actions, one of them brings you into the game. The others allow you to increase the size of your force or take more combat cards by picking up more threat. Basically, you're doing things that are making it clear that you're a danger. So, that makes the fascists more able to find you and more interested in sending more troops against you to attack you. But you have a capability to diffuse the threat, which is to get rid of certain kinds of combat cards or or command tokens that are of a specific type. Or partisans from the map in order to reduce your threat value. But if you do this, you can't pull more combat cards in. If you could pull the combat cards in, you could create a little machine that lets you run forever, basically, because the cards will probably generate more threat reduction for the diffusion than the threat it costs to draw a card. You have this dispatch capability, which allows you to exchange cards with other partisans. That is probably, in the core game is a co-op game, so it really makes a lot of sense there. It probably makes a lot less sense in the semi-co-op version, which is really a word for the fully competitive version. Yes, there's some possibility. You do want to make sure that the other guys are doing okay and are taking some of the fascists down. But you also have this recon ability, which allows you to flip over enemy counters and reveal them so that you can make better decisions as to how much force you're going to need to attack them. Because remember, they come in face down. Well, they're not face down if they've been reconned. And then you have a couple of capabilities to both move and reduce threat. One of which allows you to move more, but doesn't allow you to do anything else. Then you roll a die. If you don't have a lot of threat on you, you've got a good chance of dropping that threat down. But if you've collected up a lot of threat, it's very unlikely to happen. After 4 brigades have gone, not all brigades, after 4 brigades have gone, which could be 2 of the same brigade could go multiple times if you're playing with less than 4 players. If you're playing with more than 4 players, not every brigade goes every season. Each brigade, and this could create some weirdnesses, because if you didn't go, you could end up collecting more resources than you need. Each brigade collects resources based on how many partisans they have on the map, which is really why you want to build those up, because they give you combat cards at the same rate you would buy combat cards at. But you also have to pay for each one in terms of points off combat cards for each brigade, for each partisan that you have within your brigade. Now, a couple of limitations in the game. Both threat and number of partisans are limited to 6. Your hand size is not limited until the end of the season, at which point it's limited by 24 divided by the number of brigades, which in 4 players comes out to 6 as well. But that's the only time you check hand size. Finally, the game ends, and I really like the interplay of the different choices. It creates this sort of, well, you know, you kind of want to build your brigade size up so you get more draws, but your combat cards have more value directly. So, like, if you have too many partisans in your brigade, well, not too many, you get a bigger draw of cards, but you have to spend some of those cards. If you take cards directly, you have more effect right away, and you have effect during that season, which means if you know that, like, there's an important convoy you have to hit or something, rather than taking partisans, you want to take the resource cards. Finally, after the entire deck runs out, you have sort of this group attack on 4 cities in the game, each of which is populated, and you can tell how many how many counters are going to go into it. If you've reconned those counters, you might know something about how valuable they are. And when it comes down to it, each thing that the resistance kills goes into this bag. Each thing that the resistance fails to kill ends up in this bag. So whenever an opportunity to attack something comes up, if you don't attack it, you're saying give it to the opposing points, to the players. And the goal is to get more points than that. There's some, little messes in there. Overall, that all works fine. It works really well, but again, the mechanisms and the way they work, you're trying to balance out, how many discs do I have versus how many cards do I need, what do I expect to come, and whatnot. But it just doesn't feel as evocative as I would want it to be, to use that word again. Each of the characters in the game is different. Each of the brigades is led by someone who gives different basic bonus and a different set of these special abilities that are one use. Most of them are basically like the combat, the resource cards, but they don't count against hand limit or anything like that. That gives you another tuning dial for the game overall. For the optional rules, what do you have? Make the attacks easier. You have the simplified rules, which I'm not even going to touch. You have a couple of things that make it easier on the player, like hit and run gives you an ability to make an attack and then to also withdraw from that location. It's expensive. I don't know how likely that is to do. Loss of control during 1945. Distances between things become less, which again is going to make it easier. I didn't find that I needed anything to be terribly easier, but again, I wasn't taking as much threat as I should have. First time I wasn't getting rid of my threat. Second time I started taking too much. Multiple ambushes is an option that doesn't look very valuable either, kind of like the hit and run one. It's purely in the player's advantage, but It strengthens the convoy, and the convoy doesn't get weakened before it gets strengthened. Gunpowder factories gives you an additional attack location that may show that you can cause to show up by trying to recon it, and that factory will give you additional resources if you end up wiping it out. You only get one chance to wipe it out, though. And then the final thing is the semi-cooperative game, which creates this special political commissioner's position, which one of the brigades will hold and allows them to control decisions a little bit more, but that can be expended in order to, it's bid for, first of all, with threat, and then it can be expended in order to get an advantage, but then somebody else gets it. The victory conditions for the semi-co-op are, you want to do well, and you want to beat a proportion of what's in this bag. So basically you take whatever the fascists have pulled in and you divide that by the number of brigades total that is in the game, and if you get better than that, you end up winning. That means it's easier for someone to win that, but they're going to be cooperating less, so it may make it just as hard to win the game overall. In terms of difficulty, etc., well, people who like, these kind of solo games often like them. It's not just solo, it's a co-op game, but they're often appealing because they're challenging. Here's what I felt. The first time I played it, I had no idea what I was doing. I was totally blown away. I also played wrong. The second time, I played wrong not in my favor. The second time I played wrong slightly in my favor. And in both cases, in the first case, I was just blown away because I had no idea what I was doing. Once I kind of understood the mechanisms, it was, minus cheating for myself, it was a fairly easy game. Easier than it felt like it was. Like, I'm here thinking I'm losing the game early on. Well, it turned out it was kind of a blowout in my favor. There's room to tinker with the difficulty of the game. There are different ways to do it. The ones that are expressed in the game, I think maybe I'd find other ones as well, simply because I don't like the idea of knowing too much about the cards. Like, the idea of pulling cards out or swapping the cards, that gives me a different flavor than like rolling a die or something to see whether or not there's a 1-point difference on the attack that I'm making. Or just put that one point penalty on all attacks or whatever to make everything just a little bit harder to win. But I don't know, one made it through playtesting, etc., whereas the other one's just me thinking up ideas based on my own views. How do I feel about it? It's an interesting game. There's room for a few plays. I don't know how much more most of us are looking for from a game. Once upon a time I would look at a game and say, I can only play game X maybe 3 or 4 times, and then it's just played out or whatever. But when you get a collection the size that I have, it's like, oh, I got to play it, And, so then looking realistically, it all depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for something that's, you're going to be able to play every week, this is probably going to get itself played out fairly quickly. You're going to get to the point where you know how to beat it. You can configure it so that it's really hard to beat, though. There's no question of that, especially using a mixture of options or whatever. I don't know. You know, in terms of giving you that sort of real feeling, it is neither a detailed simulation nor does it make you feel that kind of gritty, you know, whatever it would take to get that kind of uh, hunting down Nazis and whatnot, and trying to save villagers or something. It doesn't give you that. And what it gives you is an interesting competitive model to look at and to play. So yeah, it was interesting to look at, and I would enjoy it a lot more with other people. I kind of enjoy playing these kind of co-op type games. When I play solo games designed for solo games, I often find them more enjoyable with an extra person, and we kind of divide up the decision making or discuss it or whatever. So it sucks that I didn't get that opportunity. But yeah, there's no way that I'm able to get people together for even competitive games that they're really excited about playing, supposedly. Uh, trying to sell them on, yeah, here's this game, it's neat, but I have X number of games, and this would not, this just doesn't have the the prior cachet to be able to sell it to what few number of times that I get to play games with people would be anymore. But I know if my wife were still alive, I think she would have gotten a kick out of this, especially out of the artwork. But also, but you add something like that, and for someone who was as visual as she was, there would definitely, that would increase the excitement of the game overall. When there was good artwork, that always made her happier enough that the game became happier. Just like for me, certain weird little aspects of a game can change the whole thing. Um, but yeah, playing it solo, it comes out as kind of a puzzle. Playing it solo with other people, it becomes more of a social interaction and more fun that way.